Welcome back, my friends. Jake here. Normally on my channel, I like to talk about bad news for Russia and good news for Ukraine. But in today's video, we're going to do something a little different and talk about good news for Russia, as shares of Gazprom soar 30% on record profits and a dividend promise. Okay. Russian gas giant Gazprom's shares skyrocketed more than 30% on Wednesday after its board recommended paying dividends on record net profits in the first half of this year. So that's January to June. State-owned Gazprom said the day before that it made a record 2.5 trillion rubles, or about $41.36 billion, in net profit the first 6 months of this year, despite sanctions pressure and an unfavorable external environment. That's kind of an understatement, phrasing it that way, an unfavorable external environment. So for fun, I went on Google to just kind of look at the share price of Gazprom, and Google's not giving me a chart. I can't really see what the share price of Gazprom has been doing. I went on Yahoo Finance, and Yahoo Finance just laughed at me, saying this is a privately owned company. So sure enough, I did some Googling, and about 38.37% of Gazprom is owned by the Russian Federal Agency for State Property Management. When you factor in maybe some of these other percentages from these other categories, a majority of Gazprom is owned by the Russian government. It's owned by the Kremlin. So when Gazprom pays a dividend or pays out profits, it's going to Vladimir Putin, and it's going to fund this war in Ukraine. Now here's the war map that everyone checks every day to see how the war is going for the Ukrainians. But on my channel, I've made the argument that I don't think Ukraine is going to militarily push the Russians out, to go city by city, block by block, building by building, fighting every Russian soldier to the last man. I think the casualty rate of a campaign like that would be astronomical. What's more likely to happen is there's going to be a political or economic collapse in Russia at some point this winter, and they're just going to give up on the war and withdraw from Ukraine's territory. Now, is a political or economic collapse of the Kremlin of Russia likely? Well, they've done it several times in the last 100 years, so there is a historical precedence for it. And the best way to cause a political or economic collapse of Russia is to hurt their energy exports. And we can gauge this primarily by the price of oil. There's a couple different prices for oil. WTI crude stands for West Texas Intermediate. ICE Brent crude is the average price of trading prevailing in the North Sea. But they show the exact same trends. So when we look at the chart for the price of oil over the last year, prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the price was $91 a barrel. Today, it is below that level at $86 a barrel. That's pretty good. When we switch to the other chart, it shows more or less the same thing. Prior to the war, oil was at $97 a barrel. Today, it is below that level at $93. So, of course, Gazprom made record profits for the first half of this year, January through June. But the price of energy, the price of oil, has been falling the last 4 months. And if we want to get really specific, we can Google the price of Urals oil. This is how much Russia is getting for their oil exports. And you can see prior to the war, it was at about $94 a barrel. Because of the war, the price spiked to 110. That was Russia's all-time high, the maximum amount of money they're getting for their oil exports. It then struggled and kind of collapsed, then rebounded, and if we fast forward to the end of the first half of the year, June 30th, the price of oil that Gazprom or Russia was getting was $93 a barrel. Over the last 2 months, July and August, the price has not gotten back above $93 a barrel. And my argument that I make on my channel is that It's never going up. As long as inflation in the Western world remains high, central banks have to raise interest rates to slow consumer global demand. The two economic forces are supply and demand. Yes, there are things we can do slightly to increase supply, but the more effective thing, and the only thing central banks can control, is demand. So, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is warning. This was a speech he gave in Wyoming last week. He warned of some pain ahead as the United States Federal Reserve has to fight inflation, and the only way they can do this is by raising interest rates. Central banks around the world are doing the exact same thing. Canada, Australia, Switzerland, Bank of England, the EU Bank. Everyone is raising interest rates to slow the global economy. Currently, the federal funds effective rate in the United States is 2.3%. The Fed is meeting again this month in September, probably going to raise it by another 75 basis points. Meaning, if you want to borrow money to get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, you're going to be paying closer to 7% now. If it's more expensive to borrow money, fewer people do it. The less money people have, the less they're willing to spend. The less people spend money, the lower the price of energy will go, as supply more or less will remain constant. So my argument to you is that the second half of this year for Russia and for Gazprom is not going to be as good as the first half of the year. Additionally, there's some other factors at play here that is pretty interesting. The West's plan to economically cause the collapse of the Russian energy sector. And G7 nations are now backing a plan to cap Russian oil prices in a bid to drain the Kremlin of its war chest. The G7 first agreed to explore the prospect of imposing a ban on shipments of Russian oil above a certain price. They initially started talking about this in June. Energy analysts have been highly skeptical about the integrity of this proposal, however, warning that the policy could backfire if key consumers such as China and India are not involved. And this is where a thread I found on Twitter gets very interesting. This tweet thread is from Cornelius Carroll. He describes himself as a finance and technology nerd, and he makes some pretty interesting points about this potential G7 Russian oil price cap. So the basic pretext is that countries like France, Germany, and Japan would collectively refuse to buy Russian oil above a certain price. They haven't determined that price yet, but let's just say $50 a barrel. A common sense reaction will be, well, Russia will simply refuse to sell it to them. And that is correct. Russia won't sell it to them. However, Russia does not realistically have the choice to stop producing oil. Exports are responsible for 46% of Russia's entire GDP, and oil comprises 33% of all of Russia's exports, the other being gas, coal, and raw materials. To cease oil production would make an already poor country drastically poor, especially when they're fighting a war. But wait, you say, Russia could just seize oil production for a little while, driving up prices and thus breaking the will of those participating in the oil price cap. They could then resume production when market conditions normalize. And actually, no, Russia can't do this. There are lots of engineers and oil experts who have been making this point, but I don't think people quite understand it. Because most of Russia's oil production comes from northwest Siberia. Note the mean annual temperature and the mean January temperature for this region. This part of the world gets very cold. That's what you need to know. And when it gets very cold, it is possible for oil to gel or coagulate. It basically just permanently turns into a solid. He links a YouTube video demonstrating this happening. If Russia were to halt production, especially during the wintertime, it would permanently damage its oil-producing infrastructure. wells would have to be re-drilled if the oil freezes. Pipelines also would have to effectively be rebuilt and entirely replaced. Simply put, Russia cannot afford to stop producing. They have to keep pumping. So they'll sell to someone else, I hear you say. Yes, Russia will sell oil to other countries not in the G7, countries not willing to participate in the price cap. The two obvious choices are India and China. But the question is what are they going to be willing to pay? If you think countries like India and China will pay Russia prevailing market prices for their oil out of the goodness of their hearts, I have a sandbox to sell you in Florida. India and China's own incentives are always to pay as little as possible for anyone's oil. So if the G7 have a price cap at $50 a barrel, India and China will just bid $51 a barrel to get the oil. But wait, you say, there are other countries. Those countries have storage, they'll bid up the price of Russian oil. Yeah, that might hold true for a little bit of time, perhaps a couple months, but eventually dynamics will revert to where India and China could simply just continue bidding just over the G7's price cap ceiling. So there's a lot going on here, a lot of bad news potentially for Russia's oil and energy exports for this winter, because if they stop producing, all of their equipment is basically destroyed. They'll have to repump, repipe everything. And if the G7 pulls off this price cap, even if China and India continue to buy oil, Russia's never going to get a good price for their oil. And we're only talking about Russia's oil exporting business for Gazprom. Let's now talk about natural gas, as people in Europe are much more concerned about this. And this is breaking news as Gazprom announces an indefinite shutdown of the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. Russian energy company has been due to resume gas delivery as of Saturday morning, and instead they said, nope, the pipe's turned off. Germany's not getting any more gas. I knew this day was coming, and I actually thought it would have happened sooner, but Russia has finally made the decision to cut Europe off from their gas exports. So the Russian energy major Gazprom extended the shutdown of gas flows through the Nord Stream Pipe 1 to Germany on Friday evening, providing no time frame for a reopening. This is not good for European consumers that need gas to power their homes, but it's terrible news for a company that is no longer bringing in revenue, no longer selling its product to Europe. And with oil, it is possible to store it in a tankard or, a container. But with natural gas, it's much more difficult. And natural gas is a byproduct of drilling for oil. To get the oil out, you're going to get out natural gas as well. And if you have nowhere to put that natural gas, you have to flare it. You just have to burn it off. So Russia is burning off gas that otherwise would have been going to Europe. Here's a satellite picture showing a facility flaring off the gas. As Europe's energy costs skyrocket, Russia is burning off large amounts of natural gas, according to analysts shared with BBC News. They say the plant near the border with Finland is burning an estimated $10 million worth of natural gas every single day. So they're pumping the oil out, they want the oil. But Russia can't ship or doesn't want to ship the gas anymore, so they're just flaring it. They're just burning it all off. This is money they're losing. And Russia's Achilles heel, their biggest geopolitical mess up in this entire conflict, is all of their pipeline infrastructure is designed to go west to Europe. Yes, they've got this one pipeline going east to China, and they're constructing another one through the center to northwest China. But if Europe is not willing to buy Russian energy exports, or Russia doesn't want to sell to Europe anymore, then all of this pipeline infrastructure is worthless. And as we've discussed, if nothing is flowing through the pipes, if they shut down for a short period of time, eventually the pipes congeal or coagulate or freeze, and they're no longer serviceable. You have to replace all the pipelines. Additionally, with winter, let's go ahead and forget about natural gas. But what about oil? How easy or how difficult is it for Russia to ship oil out by tankers? And in the wintertime, when the Arctic Ocean freezes over, it's pretty difficult for Russia to get their oil out simply on tankers. So where I'm going with this is congratulations to Gazprom for having a good first half of the year, but something tells me when we get their biannual reports in February or March, it's going to show a disastrous second half of the year. I don't think they'll be reporting record profits when we get the July through December numbers. All right, that's all for this update video. If you found it informative, give me a thumbs up. Any questions or comments, or you know something I don't, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, take care, be safe.